Intel's new 10nm 11th gen Tiger Lake mobile processors are here for laptops. So let's find out how well the new top-end 8-core i9 chip compares against 10th gen from last generation. I've tested games, applications, power draw, thermals, and pretty much everything. Oh, and make sure you're subscribed for the upcoming comparisons between Intel 11th gen and AMD's Ryzen. These are the differences in specs between these two processors. Both are 8-core 16-thread chips. However, the new 11th gen one has 50% more cache, but it also has lower clock speeds. Intel are claiming a 19% IPC boost to multi-core performance. So in theory, the lower clock speeds aren't a problem. Otherwise, 11th gen also uses PCIe 4 between the discrete graphics, while 10th gen uses PCIe 3. And 11th gen also supports faster memory. These are the two laptops that I'm using for testing. The Gigabyte Aero 17. Both laptops have NVIDIA RTX 3080 graphics and were tested with the exact same 64GB kit of dual rank memory. There are some important differences to be aware of though. Although I used the exact same memory kit for all testing in both laptops, the 10th gen Aero 17 runs the memory at DDR4 2933, while 11th gen runs it at DDR4 3200. And this difference results in different memory timings. Some 10th gen i9 laptops do offer XMP support and will let you run at DDR4 3200, but unfortunately this is not the case with the Aero 17. So my testing has been done with the default memory speeds of each platform. As far as I can tell, both 10th and 11th gen Aero 17 laptops have the same cooling design and same battery, so we should be in for a fair comparison as the processors are the main difference. I've measured the temperatures of both laptops while running the Blender benchmark, a heavily multi-threaded test. I've tested with both laptops without any power limit in the results above, and with both limited to a 45W PL1 below. They're both running at about the same temperature, though the 11th gen unit was a degree cooler with the power limits removed. These are the clock speeds that were seen during the same tests. With both limited to 45 watts, the 10th gen laptop was clocking a little higher. However, it wasn't by much. With no power limit in place, the 11th gen unit is clocking higher, though it was also cooler, and 90 degrees Celsius is the thermal throttle limit for the Aero 17. This tells me that for the purposes of a fair comparison, you're probably going to want to pay more attention to the 45 watt differences, as thermals weren't an issue there. And as we saw, clock speeds were higher with the older 10th gen given the same TDP, which makes sense given 10th gen's higher clock speeds on the specs. Here's what was reported for CPU package power in the same Blender test, so both are at 45 watts with the 45 watt cap in place as expected. Then with no limit, the 11th gen machine is able to hit a little higher TDP. Again, likely because it was a little cooler, but regardless, 90 watts in a sustained workload like this is honestly still quite great. Despite both being set to the same 45 watt TDP though, the 11th gen unit was drawing more power from the wall. Both laptops have the same screen and were measured at the same brightness, so depending on other subtle variances between the laptops, I can only presume this difference is mostly due to the processors. The higher power draw of the 11th gen Aero 17 also seems to be reflected in the battery life. Now, this is the first 11th gen laptop I've tested battery on, so maybe there are still optimizations to come down the pipeline. But in the same YouTube playback test, the 10th gen laptop was lasting considerably longer, and both of these laptops have the same 99 watt-hour battery inside. Here's the actual difference in performance between these two processors in Blender. At the 45 watt TDP, the 11th gen machine is completing the classroom test 12% faster. However, it's also using 12% more power in this test, so not exactly efficient. Again, unless something on my 11th gen machine is drawing more power resulting in lower battery life. With no power limit though, the 11th gen laptop is using almost 5% more power from the wall, but it's now completing the task 14% faster than 10th gen, so perhaps it's more efficient at higher power levels. So with no power limit, 11th gen was using a little more power, but performing a fair bit better while also running cooler. Generally, more power equals more heat, so this might be one of the advantages of 10nm showing itself. The performance differences in Blender are on the smaller side out of all the applications I've tested. So with all of that understanding in place, let's get into the rest of the productivity workloads, followed by gaming afterwards. Let's start out with everyone's favorite, Cinebench. Multi-core performance was much better for 11th gen here, scoring 18.5% higher than 10th gen with the 45 watt TDP limit in place, close to Intel's 19% gain claim. And when both laptops are power limited, the 11th gen machine rises to a 25% lead. Single core score is lower comparatively, however it's still around 16% higher with 11th gen in both cases. A pretty decent improvement for a single generation, at least compared to what we saw with 8th, 9th, and 10th gen. The Geekbench test also covers both single and multi-core, and 11th gen saw similar gains here too, with a 17% boost to single core performance with or without the power limit in place. Generally, a single thread isn't enough to trigger the power limit, so that's why both tests are scoring about the same now. Multi-core, on the other hand, saw a 19 to 20% increase with 11th gen, so again, nice gains. V-Ray uses the processor to render out a scene. This is a multi-threaded test, and the 11th gen gen processor was scoring 17% higher when both were capped to a 45W TDP, and it had a slightly smaller 16% lead with power limits removed. The Corona benchmark also uses the processor to render a scene, and this test had one of the smallest differences out of all applications tested, with 11th gen completing the render 8% faster with the 45W TDP cap and 10% faster without any limits. Handbrake was used to convert a 4K H.264 video file that I shot to 1080p H.265. 11th gen was completing the video transcode task nearly 17% faster with the power limits in place, and 21% faster than 10th gen when not subject to power limits. Quite a nice improvement. 7-zip was used to test compression and decompression speeds. When I've previously compared older generations of Intel processors, this test saw very minor differences, so it appears that 11th gen finally has what it takes to improve performance in this area, which is probably good for them as Ryzen typically destroys Intel in this workload. Make sure you're subscribed for my upcoming 11th gen and Ryzen comparisons. AES Encryption and Decryption is another area where Intel has typically been behind in my testing, but again that's looking to change with 11th gen now 24% faster than 10th gen. The biggest difference out of all applications that I've tested here. Adobe Photoshop was tested with the Puget Systems benchmark. The NVIDIA graphics were disabled, so we're only looking at processor differences here. Interestingly, both laptops scored slightly higher with the 45W limit in place. Granted, it's an extremely small difference, but worth noting. Regardless, 11th gen was scoring 22% higher in both cases, another nice improvement. Linux kernel compilation was a bit of a mixed bag. With the power limit in place, 11th gen was faster, however it was only completing the task 11% faster, one of the smaller differences. But then without any power limits in place, it was 28% faster. It's worth noting that this test was done in Ubuntu while all others were done in Windows, and I used Intel RAPL to modify power limits. Microsoft Excel was tested with the hardware unboxed large number crunch test. I was expecting larger gains as I believe this test depends on processor cache, and although 11th gen was completing the task a little faster, it's the smallest difference out of all applications tested. These are the differences when looking at all the applications just tested with both limited to a 45W TDP. Overall, I think the improvements are quite decent, at least when compared to previous Intel 14nm releases. I don't remember seeing gains like this between 8th, 9th, and 10th gen when comparing mobile processors with the same core counts. With no power limits, the 11th gen machine is further ahead, but as mentioned earlier, both machines may be subject to thermal throttling in some of the heavier multi-threaded tests. So for the purposes of a fairer comparison, stick to the 45W differences. In any case, both do have the same thermal throttle cap and cooling design, so you could still argue that this is still a benefit of 11th gen / 10nm. Although both processors are technically HK and can be overclocked, I haven't done this here. The main reason for this was that in a multi-core workload, neither laptop was running at the full all-core turbo boost speed anyway. You'd probably need a thicker machine with better cooling for that. And secondly, results are going to depend on silicon lottery anyway, so what I show here might not represent what you see. It's also worth mentioning that the numbers I'm showing from these laptops aren't meant to represent best case results from the i9 processors. These laptops are relatively thin for 17-inch machines. I could easily see the case where a thicker machine with even a lower i7 processor could outperform either of these if it has higher power limits and better cooling. So the goal here isn't to showcase best case performance from 10th gen or 11th gen. The goal is simply to compare the two as fairly as possible. Let's check out gaming differences next. Now, unfortunately, there's an important difference between the two GPUs in these laptops. Despite both having RTX 3080 graphics with the same power limits, the 10th gen machine has 8 gigs of VRAM while the 11th gen has 16 gigs of VRAM. I don't think this should make that much of a difference given I'm testing at 1080p and I'm also including lower setting preset levels too, but it's worth keeping in mind, and all games were tested with both processors capped to a 45W TDP with Optimus enabled. The 11th gen system has 16 lanes of PCIe 4 for the GPU, while the 10th gen system has 16 lanes of PCIe 3, and when measuring the bandwidth with 3D Mark we can see this difference, though realistically 16 lanes of PCIe 3 is still plenty for gaming laptops today. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode by running through the same part of the game on both laptops. I've got the 11th gen laptop shown in purple and the 10th gen laptop shown in red. Although 11th gen was ahead at all setting levels in terms of 1% low, interestingly 10th gen was slightly ahead in average FPS at high and ultra setting presets. It was a similar deal in Red Dead Redemption 2, which was tested with the game's benchmark. Small differences at lower setting levels, then at higher presets the 10th gen laptop was actually reaching higher average frame rate. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was also tested with the game's benchmark. The 11th gen laptop was ahead at all setting levels except for max, where the 10th gen machine was then instead slightly in front. Far Cry 5 at least finally had no better results on 10th gen, but at higher setting presets the differences are extremely small in any case. CSGO on the other hand sees some pretty large differences in terms of average frame rate with 11th gen, so it really does seem seem to vary based on the game. I only tested 5 games after seeing those strange results, plus most of the other games I test are GPU heavy, and as mentioned there is that GPU difference here, so not ideal for a CPU comparison. In any case, I'm not too sure why we're seeing these results. I double and triple checked many of the games and got the same numbers, so gaming didn't appear to show anywhere near as much of a difference compared to those productivity workloads earlier. If you've already got a 10th gen laptop today, there's no reason on upgrading to 11th gen for gaming. Unless you're in a situation where time is money, I would still argue against upgrading between a single generation. But yeah, in productivity workloads, the improvements on offer from 11th gen did surprise me compared to 10th gen. I guess that's what finally happens when you move away from 14nm. But before you decide if 11th gen is for you, make sure you're subscribed for my upcoming future comparisons between 11th gen and AMD's Ryzen 5000. Come and join me in Discord and get behind the scenes videos by supporting the channel on Patreon. And for now, why not check out some of my other laptop comparison videos over here. I'll see you over in one of those next.